Well, good evening, everybody. I hope nobody has any problem hearing me. Evidently not. Nobody hollered or waved at me. My name is Ned Schaffner, and I am a recovered alcoholic. I was humbled when Stephen got a hold of me and asked me if I would do this. I've always thought that he was one of those top-notch people, and so when he contacted me after a couple of years and not talking for a long time, I thought, wow, he even remembers me. It wasn't just the old age, Stephen. It was that, you really remembered me. And then to ask me to speak, I was honored. I'm not here to flaunt myself. I'm not here to put anybody else down. I'm here to just give some experience, strength, and hope, whether it's your first night on here or you've been doing this for 20 years. It really doesn't matter. We all have a story to tell, and it's a living story, and it changes daily. We all got here the same day, or same way, one day at a time. Um, but enough of that stuff. Let's just do my story. On June 8th, 2002, James and Vicki Parrott were on their way home from a family reunion. They were laughing and talking and driving in a full-side Ford Econoline van. They were saying how nice it was to see everybody and how big the twins are getting and how Uncle Dick is doing so good with his hip replacement and how Aunt Ethel is still the meanest thing that God ever put breath into, and just saying how every 10 years just wasn't enough. That the only time they ever seemed to get together was at weddings or funerals. Little did they know, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a full-size Dodge Ram pickup truck pulled right out in front of them. Neither driver had a moment to react, and Jim slammed into the passenger side of the pickup truck. They did a kind of lock together, and they spun around, ended up doing a barrel roll. Jim and Vicki were both evicted from the vehicle. Neither one had their seat belts on. The pickup truck ended up about 75 feet further down in the same field, pointing the opposite direction that they were coming. It was when all the dust finally settled. Vicki was laying up front outside her door, and she had a broken collarbone. A rotator cuff was messed up. She had a couple broken ribs. She had her ankle was messed up. Her pelvic was messed up. She couldn't get up, and she couldn't see Jim except for his legs underneath the front of the van if she turned and looked back up. His legs weren't moving. She kept hollering for him. Pretty soon she saw a pair of feet underneath the van go over by Jim. They knelt down for a little while. She was calling and asking, "How's Jim? How's Jim?" Pretty soon the feet got up and they came around to Vicki, and she asked, "How is my husband doing? He's older than me. He only had heart surgery about a year ago. Is he going to be okay?" And they told him that somebody had stopped with a cell phone, and they had called the ambulance and the police, and that they would be here shortly. Let's try to get her comfortable, and the next thing she knows, because of the pain, she went into shock and she passed out. When she came to, she was in the emergency room at LaPorte Hospital in northern Indiana, and with a nurse. And the nurse came up to her and she grabbed her and she said, "How's Jim? How's my husband doing?" And she said, "Well, I'll be right back." So she pulled the curtain back and went back and got a doctor. And the doctor came back, and Vicki said, "How is my husband? How's he doing?" And at that time, the doctor said that Jim did not make it, that he died on the scene, that he was killed by a drunk driver. I am that drunk driver. James Parrott died in my arms that day. The death of James Parrott did not stop my drinking at all. In fact, it kind of kicked it into high gear. I had a pity party to go to, and everybody was invited, and I would tell you all about my woes while you bought me a drink. This went on for 16 months. I knew I was going to prison. I just didn't know when. And after 16 months, on September 25th of 2003, I was convicted of reckless endangerment, DUI, with a death involved. I was sentenced to 5 years, 2.5 on good behavior, and 6 months at the Salvation Army Adult Rehabilitation Center. I was never so humiliated in my life when they walked me out in shackles and handcuffs in front of my father and put me down in a holding cell. They took me to a prison in Indianapolis, and I was there for 81 days before I finally came to the realization that I might have a problem, and that problem might be me, and that alcohol might have been a contributing factor to that problem that I have. I'm not saying I was hard-headed or anything, but it in my game plan, it just kind of looked that way. On the 15th day of December of 2003, which happened to be my father's birthday, I asked God to come in and take over. I said, I'm 50 years old. I don't have 2 pennies to rub together. I've lost everything. And at 50, this prison was not part of what I had planned as my retirement. Well, at that moment, he took over. It wasn't leaps and bounds and sparklers and lightning and thunder. It was little tiny baby steps, because he knew that was all I was capable of handling. I trusted Christ to have my best interests in mind in everything. I didn't have AA at that time. All I had was a Bible. This did not come easy, though. The lessons were painful, but I knew that if he had brought me to it, he would bring me through it. In February of the next year, I got a Dear John letter from my girlfriend. In March, I was in the gym doing the elliptical, and you have a certain length of time that you get to use the different exercise equipment. I had done my 30 minutes, and I got off for the next guy, and I was waiting on some dumbbells that another guy was using. And the next thing I remember, I wake up, I got my ankle chained to a hospital bed. It was padlocked. I have a security guard sitting right next to me, and I'm laying there in an ICU blanket or an ICU gown. That was kind of a strange way to wake up. I had no idea how I got there, and they are unable to tell you how you got there. So I just had to trust God and say, all right, I'm here. What do we do now? The next day, they ran a bunch of tests on me. They were unable to establish what my problem was. All they knew was that my heart quit beating. They didn't know why, so they surgically put in a defibrillator. Through the next several months, through different guys that I had been at that camp with that were there during that day that I died, I found out what the story was. And that I had fallen out, and they paddled me back to life. They locked the gym down. If the guards hadn't been trained on a defibrillator, if I hadn't been in prison at that time, if I'd have been out on a work site by myself, all these things, just a coincidence? I haven't been convinced of that one yet. But all these things came together to where a defibrillator has kept me alive. The story did take a while. I guess I went down, they paddled me back to life. They threw me in an ambulance. I went down toward Tell City, which is down by Louisville in Indiana. I died in the ambulance again. They put the paddles on me again. They put me right into a helicopter and they flew me up to Indianapolis. So that's how I woke up in Indianapolis after being in Branchville, Indiana. But it took almost 6 months before I even knew that story. I was transferred to a nearby prison, which is exactly the same prison I sat in for 81 days before I left. My relationship got stronger and stronger with Christ. I said the Lord's Prayer every morning and every night. I studied the Bible daily. There was a lot of programs that you can get in there with worksheets where you send them out to them and they send you a new one after it's completed. So I was doing about 11 or 12 Bible studies. I was convicted on a alcohol-related crime, and I could not get into AA or substance abuse. That's our Department of Corrections and the sense that they make. So I went along with what I had, which I believe with the history of AA, it all started off with the Bible to begin with. The good Lord had more lessons for me to learn, though, and one of them, I ended up in prison solitary confinement for 8 days. It was a simple misunderstanding. I was applying to get into substance abuse, but the reader of the application took it that it was a threat and said that I was threatening his life. And I don't know how you do that with an application, but I was, and they put me in jail. So, and I can never be, if I go back into prison, I can never get into substance abuse. I also learned that my new best friend had a sense of humor. For Lent that year, since I wasn't making a whole lot of money, I think 13 cents an hour, and I was working maybe 20 hours a week, I had nobody send me any money in, and so I would get me my soap, my deodorant, a box of saltines, and some peanut butter. At the time, I was Catholic and had been for quite some time. And so when Lent came around, we had to order commissary a week prior to it. Well, I had put some thought into it, and I thought, well, maybe I'll give up peanut butter this year. It's kind of a tough year. And then I thought, well, now that's really the only thing I haven't given up is peanut butter. I'll just pray more. I'll make it a point to pray more. Well, the following Wednesday was Lent. And we got our commissary that day, and it just so happened I opened it up, was going through my checklist, small but important, and I saw saltines and then no peanut butter, out of stock. And then I heard a laugh, and I looked around the dorm, and there was no one there but me. And I know I didn't laugh because I didn't think it was too darn funny. Food in there isn't that good, and I figured, well, at least I can always have saltines and peanut butter and fill me up. I think God had a different idea. Yeah, you will give up peanut butter just like I gave up my son for you. So let's see, last Lent, I'm not Catholic anymore, but I still celebrate Lent, and I still give up peanut butter, and that was 18 years in a row. It's not so much that I'm trying to dwell in the past, but I certainly don't want to forget where I came from. Let's see. I haven't done this in a while. I'm out of practice. I was released from prison on the 4th of July of 2005. I'm a Vietnam veteran, so between getting my freedom back from prison and being a vet, that's become a pretty special Independence Day for me. One of my hardest lessons to learn was understanding where the boundaries of my control were. I'm out of prison now, and I have to go forth and prosper, as they say. And I had to learn to let go and let God. I'd always put myself first and planned out the short-term actions of others. I seemed to always be disappointed or angry when others didn't carry out their part of my plan. I thought that they should. I had to learn to completely let God run the show. I needed to just let go of the wheel, get in the back seat, and enjoy the ride. Christ was not my co-pilot any longer. He had full control of my life. I went to the ARC over in South Bend, Indiana, the Adult Rehabilitation Center for the Salvation Army. I was adjusting to a whole new outlook on life. I had a couple years of sobriety, 22 months, so I kind of had a head start on a lot of guys that were in there. But as a convicted felon, no college, over 50 years old, my job search was daunting, to say the least. I had many rejections, closed doors. However, I knew Christ would carry me through the tough times if I continued to stay on a straight path. It was around December of 2006. I was still not drinking, surprisingly. I was attending church every Sunday. I was doing AA meetings frequently. And I had found a $10 an hour job, a cash job, from a friend of mine. I had just come out of the bank one Friday evening, and I was getting ready to get in my truck, and my cell phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I was at a point where if God figured I needed that phone call, I'd answer it. I picked it up, said hello. It was a female's voice. Well, I had just gotten an apartment finally after 6 months of being out on my own. And it ended up that it was Vicky, the widow of the man that I had killed. We started to chat a little bit. She said, oh, I heard you got an apartment. And I said, yeah, just got it a week ago. And she goes, well, I was just wondering if I could have the address. Well, everything that I had been through between the lawsuits and the civil suits and the warrants and the arrests, and I said, really? Is this what I'm supposed to do? And he said, yeah, give her your address. So I did. We went on and we chit-chatted a little bit longer, and it was killing me. I had to find out why. So I asked her, I said, Vicky, I said, what did you need my address for? She said, oh, I wanted to send you a Christmas card. The woman of the man that I killed, the widow, the wife, had forgiven me enough that she wanted to send me a Christmas card. I crawled in my truck and I just sat there and cried for about a half an hour like a 12-year-old little girl. I just couldn't believe it. But at that time, I began to heal. About 6 weeks later, after Christmas, I get another phone call from Vicky. She asked if we could do coffee together. I said, sure, why not? So we met for coffee, and she said, I have a favor to ask. People have heard about you and I and how we've become friends and how we go to the same church. And she said, a friend of mine, her husband, works in Indiana State Prison, which was about 9 miles away. She said he works in the GED class and wanted to know if we would come in and present our story to the inmates. Again, I looked up before I looked anyplace else. And I kept looking up because I did not want to go back to prison. I just got out of there. So we prayed on it. I said, can we just go that far today? Well, it didn't take long before it got back to other people that this opportunity has arisen and, oh, you ought to go do this. It would be so good for you and for others. And okay, not a problem. let's go do this. So we had to go over and get signed up, and we had to go through the guarded gates, and I hear them slamming behind me, and I'm not a real happy camper. And she grabs me by the arm and she says, "Oh, I'm so scared." She had no idea that I was liking to wet my pants right about then when that slammed shut behind me. I had heard that sound a lot. I didn't like it anymore now. We went in and we did our talk. I was scared to death that it was never going to work. And again, I was surmising the outcome of something that I had absolutely no control over. It's one of those things, when are you ever going to learn? It came out, we had about 65 inmates in there. And by the time we were done with our 45 minutes of talking, all you could hear was sniffing and snorting and blowing their noses and wiping their tears. And it was an amazing talk. She started off with the story of the accident. And she would say how Jim had died and how the doctor had said that, you know, how it all took place. And then she would turn to me standing up on the stage and she would say, "And this is the man responsible for my husband's death." And then she would walk over and put her arms around my neck and give me a hug. This is 18 years later, and I still can't swallow when I tell you that. We all heard about forgiveness, but to actually feel that kind of forgiveness, it's just unbelievable. This is something that we have to do to so many other people and do it fully. This success of our little talk started many good things for many people in the next few years. Vicki and I shared our story many, many times together and I've done it several hundred times myself. We were contacted by several newspapers, radios, TV, along with high schools, court-ordered victim impact panels, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Purdue University, and many recovery groups and institutions. I ended up becoming a regular at Indiana State Prison, working with the substance abuse and reentry programs. This has helped me stay sober and has helped many, many others to follow along. In closing, I would like to say he has everything in his hand. And all we ever have to do is just ask him to help and then stay out of his way. Trust me, he's got this one. Thank you.